So now we're ready to begin, and I am going to be speaking about the 26th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. This chapter is called Dharani, and it is a quite wonderful chapter, but easy to overlook. And that's one of the things that I will be talking about the difficulties that we might have in encountering something like this. Basically, what happens in this chapter is fairly straightforward in an esoteric way, which is a kind of funny statement, in that four great bodhisattvas and a group of rakshas, the kind of demons, give dharanis to help protect the teachers of the Dharma. And that is pretty much what happens in this chapter on the surface. Of course, if you look below and you see how this chapter fits in with everything, what is happening here is quite profound. And I'm going to see if I can show that in my talk today. So let's just begin with how this chapter fits into the sutra. We know, starting with chapter 19 or 20, depending on how you look at it, we're in the action section of the sutra. All of the major teachings and revelations of the Lotus Sutra have already been presented in the preceding chapters. And now we're seeing various bodhisattvas, from never disparaging to the medicine king, to wondrous voice, to Avalokiteshvara Guanyin, actually showing what they do in the world. It's really about action. So some of the themes and things that we've seen in the sutra continue in this particular chapter. For one thing, there is the theme of protection, and that protection is actually mentioned in 14 times throughout the sutra. And this is where the Buddha gives the teachings to end suffering, and the Buddha protects the teachers who present suffering to sentient beings, and they in turn vow to protect the teachings. So there's a real symbiotic relationship of protection and ways of helping sentient beings to practice, encounter the Dharma, and to reach enlightenment and Buddhahood, which is the promise of the sutra. So one of the greatest themes in the sutra is teaching itself. It's mentioned over 500 times in the sutra in a variety of ways. From the Buddha to the bodhisattvas to various sentient beings who are taking on the teaching. It is one of the greatest themes, or perhaps the greatest theme. The only thing that's mentioned more in the sutra is the Buddha himself. It's mentioned almost 1,500 times. But teaching is the predominant thrust of the sutra. And it's not, as a lot of people think, just that the sutra is self-promoting. The sutra is really promoting mind itself and Buddhahood. The sutra, as I've said before, doesn't have a self to promote. Now, this particular chapter narrows down the way that protection and even the teachings are given by the use of dharanis, right? Tuolani in Chinese, or zhou. Dharanis and mantras are quite similar. I'll go into that a little bit more later on. But these incantations and spells help sentient beings practice by memory, by actually protecting and sometimes healing the suffering of sentient beings. And the chapter ends with a multitude of beings actually reaching what's the patience to and the conviction that no dharmas arise. In Sanskrit, it's anupadika dharma kashanti. And That is a stage of the 8th level of a bodhisattva. It's a time of non-regression. So the sutra is really aiming at things that are quite profound. What happens to a lot of us when we read it is we get caught up in the Dharanis, which I will show a little bit later, which are not immediately intelligible to us or understandable even in how to use them. Another thing that the sutra continues to do, this chapter, is turning conventional ideas upside down. Now, with the promulgation of the sutra, we know that everyone will reach Buddhahood. Buddha was not born in this world, nor did he die, as we learn in the original teachings. And Devadatta, the evil cousin, and by extension, Mara, the evil one, the disruptor, is not as malevolent as we see. As a matter of fact, may be good in the way that these forces are challenges and make us practice. No females, especially young females, and especially non-humans, are not going to get anywhere in the Dharma, except in the Lotus Sutra. It shows in chapter 12, a young dragon princess, 8 years old, who instantaneously reaches Buddhahood. So there are things that are shown in this sutra that are truly revelations to the arhats and the practitioners who we read in the pages, and to us as practitioners. And one of the things that we have to learn when we read the sutra is that it's presenting things to us in a different manner than we're normally used to. We're not getting pithy phrases like, abide nowhere and this mind will arise, like we find in the Diamond Sutra, or there are nothing, the mind is nothing but filled with its own projections, as we learn in the Lankavatara, or statements about non-dualism, or even statements about Buddha nature, where this sutra is utterly woven with the reality of our Buddha nature, but it's not really mentioned specifically. And that is the greatness and the challenge of the Lotus Sutra, because things are not presented to us as clearly as we might like, because, and I'll get into this in a moment, because of the expedient means that the Buddha in his great wisdom saw that we needed, because it's really too difficult to understand where we are. The other thing that is characteristic of this sutra and many others is its inclusivity of all types of practitioners, from gods in heaven to rakshas, ghosts, and men, women of great learning, of no learning, all are included. So now I just want to talk about the expedient means, which I think is really quite important. And what I'm going to do now is go into a, not a very long, but a somewhat long quote by Tao Sheng, who was a monk in the 4th and 5th centuries in China, who is the first one to actually write a full commentary of the Lotus Sutra. And his comments in this chapter are, I find, very interesting. And so I'll read them and try to unpack them. So Tao Sheng says, the causes and conditions and calendrical numbers match with each other in a way a shadow matches a real object and an echo matches a real voice. This being the case, how can one escape luck or misfortune and calamities or happiness? Now, what this means, it's a little inscrutable at first, but the idea of causes and conditions, which is something that we who study Buddha Dharma have heard right from the beginning. It's second nature to us, the concept, right? But the actuality of causes and conditions all of the forces and the collateral things that are arising that actually make a given moment what a given moment really is, this is really beyond ordinary sentient beings. I mean, just how everyone is come to be here through Zoom at this moment is rather remarkable. Not only did you have to be born and learn a variety of things, including English, to understand me, but all of the technology had to be built in order for the computers and the internet to work, and we had to be healthy enough to be able to sit here, and that's just the surface, right? All of the things that happened in order for you to have breakfast this morning are kind of incalculably complicated. So when Tao Sheng says causes and conditions match calendrical numbers, and by that I mean as our concepts of the world. In other words, what we actually encounter, what we can know, and what's behind what we're perceiving are quite different. They're just a shadow of one thing or the other, an echo of one thing or another. And this becomes very relevant in understanding how these Dharanis are used, because the Dharanis are coming from what Master Sheng Yen comes, the secret door, Mimi Mun, that is something that the Buddha is capable of enunciating and teaching and spreading, but is not immediately understandable to us. So I think it's really important to get an appreciation of what we really can understand, what's really going on in our lives, and what is going on in the teachings in their deepest manifestation. So, and then given this kind of mismatch, right, between reality and our perception of it, then Tao Sheng says, how can one escape luck or misfortune and calamities or happiness, where we're subject to the 8 winds, right, of gain and loss, pain and pleasure, fame and infamy, and praise and blame. We can't escape, given that we are caught in that world. So then Tao Sheng continues to say, yet profound speeches and preaching on Li. Now, this is the thing that Tao Sheng has expressed hundreds of times in his work, in his commentary. Li is the essential, non-conceptual, non-perceptible by our senses meaning, if you will, the true nature of things that is displayed throughout the Lotus Sutra. But it's something that you can only come to appreciate and come to experience through a deep practice, a deep contemplation of the sutra. So he said, yet profound speeches and preaching on Li are cut off from the general mass of people by the dimension that can be expressed. So these are things that can only be expressed as wondrous or mysterious. In other words, people encounter some of the teachings from the sutra, and they are wondrous, mysterious, sometimes off-putting, sometimes attractive, but we only can practice these things with a sense of faith. So then Tao Sheng goes on to say, with the result that those with shallow knowledge become too weak-willed to receive and keep the sutra. And the Buddha is trying to use all sorts of expedient means to reach all sentient beings at whatever level they are. So Tao Sheng continues, the Buddha wants all sentient beings to rely on incantations, these dharanis, in order to make sincere the collective sentiment of contemporary beings. He says the people of other realms believe in and respect these incantations. And the method of incantation, which is the subject of this chapter, or this is what is displayed in the chapter, it can ward off misfortune and invite luck, and is applicable to every situation. And then he said, the latter age will see lots of fearful things happening. I found that kind of somewhat amusing, given this is written in perhaps the 5th century AD. I don't know what Tao Sheng would think if he were alive today. So the latter age will see lots of fearful things happening. Nobody will be able to cultivate the good without the risk of being harmed. And so, and then he continues to say that these Dharanis are given to ordinary sentient beings out of compassion. And they address sentient beings' fears, and sentient beings are pleased with the Dharanis. So I just wanted to give that that viewpoint of Tao Sheng to explain the expedient means and some of the things that we might have to overcome in approaching a chapter like this. So something that's different in this chapter than anything we found before is the Dharanis themselves. Incantations are mentioned a number of times in the sutra as things that the great bodhisattvas have mastered. But now actual Dharanis are being given to us in this chapter. And so Shifu, in his book, The Exquisite Dharma Teaching, Juemao Shuofa, says that the purpose in this chapter are 3 things. The mantra, the Dharanis, are used to protect the preacher, the teacher, and then to transform him. And it also speaks of the esoteric door, the Mimi Mun. And all of that is for the purpose of spreading the Lotus Sutra, which is spreading the Dharma in the deepest way possible. And this is the nature of the esoteric is challenging us to move deeper than we normally are. So now the next thing is our difficulty in accepting these things. So many sutras, besides this one, the Diamond Sutra and Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, and I'm sure many others, talk about how if somebody can receive and accept the teachings, even sometimes one gatha, just 4 lines, without being startled or afraid, that is truly wondrous. So there is that strangeness that we often encounter in confronting what we're being shown or told in a sutra. And remember, the Lotus Sutra is more showing us the teachings than telling us. So that's why we have to put the puzzle together. And then all of us, or most of us anyway, have this a fear that is born of ignorance. In other words, if I can't understand something, it's wrong or stupid, not me. That's how we often react to things. And then there's the other aspect of the kind of grasping we have of seeking knowledge for the sake of status, to show how smart we are or whatever, or to get advantage over others. And we want also things to fit in place as we understand them. So they fit into the lattice work of our own misconceptions, which is what happens. So we look for things that we can hold on to, and things that we've known. We've learned so much of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, dependent origination, and these are all mentioned within the Lotus Sutra at various times, but they're understood as important, and they're understood as part of the one vehicle, but not the entirety of the one vehicle. And the one vehicle, I've said this in the past, and I'll say it again, is really mind itself. And it is not something that can be really expressed. The rubric, the description of one vehicle is just a bunch of words, but what it actually is something else. So all of the parables which make the Lotus Sutra is so famous are accessible intellectually, but only to a point, right? And the Lotus Sutra has been described famously as a teaching that's never given, right? In the first chapter, Manjushri proclaims that the light that is emitted from the Buddha's warna, from the top of his, between his eyebrows, announces the teaching of the one vehicle, but it's not given. It's not given explicitly, but it's given throughout the sutra, just in ways that are really revealed by the li, the deep principle that's within the sutra. So once again, we really try to hold on to things intellectually, and they're just going to slip through our fingers in this case. Other things to know. So one interesting thing is I use many translations, plus I read the sutra in Chinese, and it's really interesting to see how different scholars translate different words and how they react to things. So one of the early, at least early in modern times, 1974, Leon Hurwitz was a great scholar of Chinese and Sanskrit, and used both of those in order to translate the sutra. And it's still referred to today by modern, more contemporary translations. So when he gave his summary of the 28 chapters, where he'll name a particular chapter, he'll give its title and a brief description. In the Dharani chapter, he writes one word, Dharanis, does not go into it. And there are certain points, and I have great respect for Leon Hurwitz, and empathy for dealing with the Dharanis. He just said some of them are just mumbo jumbo, made no sense to him. So let's now move down into a little bit of a deeper level and talk about sound itself. Sound is really important in the Lotus Sutra, and also when we encounter sound, the word yin in Chinese, it becomes clear that it's not just vibrations, along a particular gamut. It's also a transmission. Sound can be a transmission. It can convey meaning. So if we think about sound in our lives, right, it's probably one of the first things we encounter when we're in the womb is the sound from the outside. There's no light. So it's first sound. And it is the vibrations, are the energy of the universe. There's a saying, the Buddha looked out throughout the universe and he said, all that I can see is vibrations. I learned that in my first retreat many years ago. And so in the Lotus Sutra, there are so many manifestations of sound, sounds of Brahma, drums resounding, low-pitched sounds attained for people who are doing a minimal but very accurate understanding of the Buddha path, and they're on the way. This is in the second chapter. Sounds can be inferior objects. Sounds can be things that cause desire, right? Then there is the sound of the thunder shaking the earth, which happens a number of times through the sutra. And there's sound in the sutra, it talks about the sounds of demons fighting, sounds as offerings, right? Of music. There's a part of no sound, human beings in chapter 10, finding a quiet place. When the seven-jeweled stupa opens up, there is a tremendous sound that resonates through the universe. That's in chapter 11. And then it's really spoken about in chapter 19 as the divine faculty of hearing, the 1200 qualities of the ears. the ear. And then in chapter 21, the Buddhists, all the Buddhists, it seems, it doesn't give a limited number, snap their fingers, and that sound is heard throughout the universe. And these teachings of sound so have many, many different levels. And of course, I mentioned this last time with Avalokiteshvara, Guan Yin actually reaching enlightenment through his contemplation of sound, which was a contemplation that went beyond sound itself, but used sound as a door. And there are a variety of voices that are described throughout the sutra: pure voices, the Buddha's voice, subtle voice, hearing and empowerment, hearing beings throughout the universe, the lion's voice, of course, and then some of the bodhisattvas. Of course, there is Avalokiteshvara, a perceiver of the world sound. There is a light and sound heaven, and other beings, the sound of thunder in the clouds, a Buddha. So I'm just giving a picture of how important sound is. And actually, just to give a little demonstration of this, I'm going to just show you a little something from YouTube. Let's see if it comes up. Okay, I just have to share the screen. 1 second. All right, so okay, it's a little hard to do with a laptop. So this is an experiment of a Chladni plate. It's just a thin metal plate where the scientists are going to introduce various levels of frequency with salt. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay. I'm just skipping ahead. I'll just leave it there. So when you first see this, you think that somebody is playing games, but this is actually a result of the vibrations that configure differently as the frequencies go up. And I'm not saying that the Dharanis create patterns like that. I'm also not saying that they're not doing that, but just to note the rather miraculous aspect of sound and what might be behind what is going to look like to us as kind of incomprehensible, incomprehensible teachings. So let me just get back to where I was. Oh, I know what to do. Okay, so now I want to give a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, which will help connect some of this idea of the energy of sound, which comes through a sutra and its transformation into a dharani. So in talking about dharanis, Thich Nhat Hanh says, it's the same when we hear a sutra. Through the sound of the words themselves, we receive a kind of powerful spiritual energy, and we will be transformed straight away. Listening here does not mean in the ordinary distracted way. When our body, speech, and mind are not in harmony or concentration, if there is anxiety or dissatisfaction, and we are only half listening, even though we may hear the words being spoken, we will not be able to receive energy of the transmission. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have great powers of concentration. When these beings dwell in great samadhi, full of the energy of understanding and compassion, the words they speak or the sounds they produce become dharanis. Any sound, any word, any verse or phrase from a sutra. Through this practice, though this practice may sound strange, it is not difficult to understand. When a Dharma teacher offers a teaching while dwelling in samadhi with purified body, speech, and mind, that power of concentration produces a great source of energy. Those who see and hear the teaching while dwelling in concentration will be able to receive the wonderful source of energy, just as if an electric current were to pass between the teacher and the student. So I just want to give that background, make a connection between the meaning, which is, this is how we normally think of sutras, as kind of condensations of meaning, pithy teachings, but there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more than meets the eye and meets the ear. So now I want to go through the sutra somewhat quickly, right? If I had more time, I would read through it. It's not that long, but I just want to explain what happens, and then maybe talk about a few other things. So the way I'll do this is to go through the persona. There are basically, 4 bodhisattvas and a group of rakshas that are in addition to the Buddha. So the chapter begins with Medicine King Bodhisattva, Yawang Pusa, right? Who is asking about blessings. And he asks the Buddha, if there are good men or good women who can accept and uphold the Lotus Sutra, if they read and recite it, penetrate its meaning, or copy the sutra scrolls, how much merit will they gain? And the Buddha explains the merits of holding the sutra as great as making offerings to innumerable Buddhas. And then with that understanding, the Medicine King then bestows his dharani to guard and protect upholders of the sutra. And I will actually show the sutras when I go through the chapter, because it's not easy to talk about them themselves, right? So this is the Medicine King Bodhisattva giving this protection to the teachers of the Lotus Sutra. So then the next Bodhisattva is Brave Donor, Yungshur Pusa, right? And he is going to give a dharani which protects us from our weaknesses and vulnerabilities, so people can't take advantage of us. And one thing also to mention that happens in a number of these bestowals is that the Bodhisattva also says that 42 millions and billions of Buddhas actually pronounce and say and use this Dharani themselves. So what's happening in the chapter is there is a lineage, a thought, authentication that's given. Not only is this a great teaching right now, but this is a teaching that goes back to beginningless time, used by all the Buddhas. So it's given a great dharmic seal of authority by all the Buddhas. So now when brave donor Bodhisattva gives his Dharani, he says if a teacher of the Dharma acquires these Dharanis, then although yakshas, rakshas, putanas, krityas, kumbandhas, or hungry spirits could spy out his shortcomings and try to take advantage of them, they will be unable to do so. And all of those beings, I'm not going to go into defining them, but they're all various types of demons and malevolent creatures that one can encounter. And sometimes in the sutra, they are indeed considered malevolent, and other times they're benevolent. And I think one of the deeper teachings is it has to do with how you encounter these things. But once again, the Dharani is for our benefit. We sentient beings who don't really know that much and have fears and do have seeming enemies external to us. I mean, ultimately, the teachings say that really the enemies come from within, which is what we really are trying to tame. But we have a long way to go before we get there. And then the Bodhisattva says that to harm teachers like that would be equivalent to harming the Buddhas or offending. It's a question of how you interpret the word in Chinese. But once again, this gives more authority to the Dharani and shows its power, how it is connected, just like Thich Nhat Hanh said, like this kind of electric spark between the teacher and the disciple. The Dharani is fulfilling that kind of purpose. So then the next Bodhisattva is the heavenly king Vaishravana. May not exactly be a Bodhisattva, he's a heavenly king, very close, protector of the world. Tianwang Husher, right? He's called. Sometimes he's called Dwa Wen, hearing many sounds. Once again, that theme runs through the sutra. And Medicine King Bodhisattva was the Bodhisattva who appears most in the Lotus Sutra, right? And some of them, like Heavenly King, appears in 3 chapters. Now, what he does is, once again, out of his compassion, he says that he'll give supernatural spells to shield and guard the teachers of the Dharma. And he will shield and guard those who uphold the sutra, making certain that they suffer no decline or harm within the area of 100 yojanas, which is like 1,000 miles. So he's protecting from illness and distress. So all of the different kinds of suffering that we sentient beings that encounter, a lot of them are being addressed here through the Dharanis. Then the next great being, a heavenly king, upholder of the nation, Churgoa Tianwang, he's giving overall protection. And this is the only time in the sutra that he appears. And he offers peace and comfort and protection from poison, illness, persecution, both in waking and in dreaming. So he says, world honored one, with these spells, I will protect, as I said, from poison, illness, persecution, waking and dreaming. Now, I'm going to take a little bit more time on the last group because it's perhaps the longest part in the chapter, and it's quite interesting. There's more than just the Dharanis. So these are the 10 Raksha daughters who are in the assembly. That's the Locha Nyu, and their mother, who is Gwezamu or Hariti. And they're named, right? And interestingly about the names, it sort of shows their ferocity, if you will. They're named Lambda, Vilamba, Crooked Teeth, Flowery Teeth, Black Teeth, Much Hair, Insatiable, Necklace Bearer. The 9th one is called Kunti, and the 10th one is called Stealer of the Vital Spirit of All Living Beings. So if they're angry, they can certainly do a number on us, but their role here is quite different. And they appear in chapter 10, in chapter 25, and in other chapters in the Lotus Sutra. So what they do is they say, World Honored One, we too wish to shield and guard those who read, recite, accept, and uphold the Lotus Sutra, and spare them from decline or harm. If anyone should spy out shortcomings of these teachers and try to take advantage of them, we will make it impossible for them to do so. So they're actually acting towards the offenders, if you will. And so then they pronounce their spells, and they utter a 19-word Dharani. And then they say something very interesting in terms of their devotion and their vows. And talking about these people who would disrupt the Dharma, they say, though they climb upon our very heads, they will never trouble the teachers of the Dharma, whether it be, and they mention all of these various kinds of beings, right? None of those will we allow to hurt a teacher. Or if someone has a fever, and this is way before COVID, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to a 7-day or a constant fever. And then whether someone is in a man's form, a woman's form, young boy's form, in young girl's form, though it only be in a dream, it will never trouble them. And this is quite interesting if you compare this to what happened in chapters 24 and 25, where both Wondrous Voice Bodhisattva and Avalokiteshvara have this ability to change form, especially Avalokiteshvara, who can not only change form, but can actually hear the deepest cries, the deepest longings of sentient beings. So these Rakshas seem to be in sync with that. An interesting story about Hariti, who is the mother of the Rakshas. There are many backstories about her. The one that I find more appealing, being a demon, she was up to demonic kinds of things, and she would steal children and hide them in her cave. And the Buddha, to stop her, actually came to the cave and hid one of her own children underneath his begging bowl. This is a miraculous thing the Buddha can do. And of course, she was very upset. So the Buddha explained to her, well, if you feel this way, imagine how all the people that you have hurt feel. And she repents, and she vows to uphold the sutra and to protect all those, all the children and anyone who would uphold the sutra. So in the presence of the Buddha, the Rakshas say, if there are those who fail to heed our spells and trouble and disrupt the preachers of the Dharma, their heads will split into 7 pieces like the branches of an arjaka tree. Just want to stop there because it sounds kind of dire. There's an understanding that she might blow someone's mind. They might totally stop someone in their path, and this is to be understood as metaphoric as opposed to actually destroying someone, but who knows? And the Arjaka tree was a tree that supposedly when a branch fell, it would fall into 7 pieces. And so the Rakshas go on to say their crime will be like that of one who kills father and mother, or one who presses out oil. And there are many different understandings of this. It's when they press out oil and they introduce some kind of unwholesome ingredient in the oil when they press out, or cheat others with measures and scales, or like Devadatta, disrupts the order of monks. Anyone who commits a crime against these teachers of the Dharma will bring on himself guilt such as this. And then the Raksha daughters speak these voices, and they say to the Buddha, "World honored one, we will use our bodies to shield and guard those who accept, uphold, recite, and practice this sutra. We will see that they gain peace and tranquility, freeing them from decline and harm, and nulling the effect of all poison herbs." So the Buddha said to the Raksha daughters, "Excellent, excellent. If you can shield and guard those who accept and uphold the mere name of the Lotus Sutra, your merit will be immeasurable. How much more so if you shield and guard those who accept and uphold it in its entirety, who offer to the sutra roles." And then the Buddha goes on to talk about all the various types of beautiful offerings of incense and oil and flowers that could be offered in respecting the sutra. And so the Buddha gives his affirmation to all of the Rakshas. And interesting enough, there's a line there. If you can shield and guard those who accept and hold the mere name of the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren took this as the one of the authentications of the. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, you're back.
All right, I'm back. Did you miss much, or I think the connection went off, but
yeah,
I'm not sure.
I lost you like a couple of like 30 seconds or something, 20 or 30 seconds. I don't know if other people have the same issue or just my connection.
Oh, okay. Well, I just was summarizing the end of the sutra with the Anupadika Dharma Kashanti, that it could be a practice for an ordinary sentient being, but it's also indicative of the 8th bhumi, of a non-regressive, very high-level bodhisattva. So the import of this chapter is really quite profound. And what I want to do just briefly is share the screen and show the Dharanis. Wait, let me actually go to where they are. There we go. All right. So, and as I said, in the time allotted, I couldn't see really reciting the Dharanis. I just want to show that the first one, which is Medicine King, is quite long. Others are much shorter. And in looking at these words, which I'm sure none of us really understand, I'm reminded of when Master Sheng Yen was ill, and Guogu spread the Medicine King. He sent the Medicine King Dharani to a lot of us, which had various words like this that are not immediately comprehensible. And there was a commentary which said that if I were to explain the meaning of all the words in this Dharani, even a kalpa would not give me enough time. So this is something to kind of behold in looking at these Dharanis. And there's the last one down there. So I'm not going to go. I'm not going to be able to read them or anything like that because of the time. But I did want to show you how each one of these are inserted in the narrative that I just gave in going through the sutra. So let me go back, stopping the share. Okay, so now what I'd like to, I think I've covered the idea that Dharanis have power as mnemonic devices, as the kind of encapsulation of the teaching in ways that are non-conceptual. Master Sheng Yen mentions that early on, before Buddhism, Dharanis were associated with sorcery itself that could avert disasters. And there's a whole over 100 Dharani sutras, even in the Chinese canon, which are kind of shortcuts, if you will, to enlightenment through Dharani practice, which is not something we particularly study in Chan. And so now I'd like to bring this down to something that's a little bit more relatable, because one of the interesting things of talking about something like a Lotus Sutra, which is more than 2,000 years old, perhaps, and from another country, another time, and seemingly unaware of what is going on today. But as I think I show, and I think many people see, it's quite relevant to the suffering, to the issues that are happening today. So this idea of a Dharani, and for this next part, I'm really indebted to my friend Taigen Dan Layton for giving me this idea. And the idea is of a negative Dharani. And so a negative Dharani is something that almost all of us have, that we carry around, and it is pretty subconscious or unconscious. Things like, I'm a loser, I can't do it, everything is hopeless, everybody is better than me, or could be, I'm better than everyone. These kind of motifs, which are part of our karmic configuration, which are often driving us, but we're really not aware of. So what a Dharani can do is clear the mind of these things, and perhaps make some of these themes, these motifs, this kind of negativity that we often hold on to. It can bring it to the fore. And then when Taigen Dan was talking to me, he mentioned how lots of songs can be actually Dharanis in themselves for us, in a way. I'm not suggesting that people take popular songs and practice them, but I'm suggesting that people often do sometimes. So there are a lot of things in Bob Dylan, which Taigen Dan has made kind of a subspecialty. It's written much on many of his songs and given talks on them. So like a rolling stone, how does it feel, to be on your own with no direction home? So you're kind of becoming aware of what's going on in your mind. There's another Dylan song, I Shall Be Released, which in itself is kind of a Dharani, could be a mantra, where it begins, they say that every man needs protection and every man must fall. And Dylan is often seeing what is going on at a very deep level within us. And this chapter is really addressing this idea of protection. And it's something to contemplate of what do we need protection from, and that also leads to the idea of the secret door, right? The Mimi Mun that Master Sheng Yen talked about. I've spoken about this in earlier talks, but this kind of a door is a little bit like the gateless gate It's something that is, it's not conspicuous by its absence. It's not visible because it's everything that we encounter, and the subtleties of life. Even when I was talking about Tao Sheng and about the difference between how we perceive the everyday world and how causes and conditions are really affecting us, those are the kind of things that are accessible through the secret door, I believe, that Master Sheng Yen is talking about. And ways that this might become accessible to us is if we see things that are actually troubling us and we start to give a name to them, and rather than just naming them and forgetting them, we start to look deeply into what is troubling us. You know, why do I procrastinate? Why can't I keep friends? Why can't I be a good friend to others? Why am I hitting my head against the same wall at work, at home, time after time? So these things, the reason why I'm equating these with secret doors is they are various troubles that we have that seem to be right at the back of our mind. And we sort of know about them, but we don't really look at them. And I think what we need are tools. Now, one of the actual definitions of a mantra is something that protects the mind. It's also a tool of the mind. And what we get through our practice, through reading the sutra, through being in a sangha, and through our self examination, and our desire to be of use in the world and not to do harm and to purify our minds. Well, the basic teachings, right? These are all accessible to us by looking at what's going on. And when, of course, what I've been talking about for a number of years now is the Lotus Sutra. And much of what I'd like the talk to be is kind of an advertisement for the Lotus Sutra. I get no kickbacks from the Buddha, by the way. I just want to make that clear. I just think that this is a rather remarkable sutra, and there are many things in it which could be either off-putting or seemingly non-relatable to. But if you look deeper and you read it continuously and you try to put the puzzle of what's going on together so that you really do have a tool and a way to practice, I think it's really, really a wonderful gift. And that's what the Lotus Sutra keeps saying to me, right? I don't quite think of myself as the teacher of the Dharma, as mentioned in chapter 10, but I'm doing what I can. And so I'm just very, very grateful to share this with everyone and having this opportunity. It is really an absolute blessing. So I want to thank you all. I think I've come to the end of my time, so I'm going to give the ending liturgy. May the virtuous merits adorn and purify the Pure Land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the suffering of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind. Exhausting this body of retribution, may we be born in the land of extreme bliss. So thank you, everyone.